What does it take to turn breakthrough medical innovation into real-world impact, especially when the stakes are human lives and the system is stacked against you? Welcome to Industry Ignited. I'm your host, Dr. Leanne Aguilar, and today I'm joined by Joseph Rafferty, CEO of Vestec Incorporated. Joe is a seasoned MedTech leader who has spent decades designing, building, and scaling commercial and operational excellence across some of the most complex sectors in healthcare. Joe, I'm excited to have you here.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I'm very flattered and humbled to be invited. So thank you for bringing me on.
Well, let's get started. I know you began your career actually in journalism, not medical devices. What drew you into MedTech, and how did that early training shape the leader you became?
That's a wonderful question, and quite frankly, insightful. Back in the in the early '80s, I got out of Temple University in '79 with that journalism background. And back in the early '80s, you may remember there was an awful lot of exciting innovation going on in the medical field, things like heart transplants and lung transplants and kidney transplants and things like that. So there was a lot of excitement going on there. And I realized that a lot of the same skill set, the inquisitive nature of a journalistic mind and the ability to ask questions of heart surgeons, of lung surgeons, et cetera, kind of lent itself to being able to understand what their problems were and then being able to fix or help them fix the problems with new technologies or new techniques. You know, you're in one hospital one day and you're in another hospital the next day. And if you're paying attention, you know, you're taking your notes for a story, if you will, you can bring some of that insight to other clinicians. So that part was very attractive. And oh, by the way, you're really dealing with the best and the brightest minds, hands, and eyes in the world. You know, that it was the cutting edge of medical, surgical innovation. So I've been blessed to be able to stay on that cutting edge my entire career, you know, listening to these clinicians share what their problems are and moving with the innovation. So.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. So you were there, for a different purpose. You were there to write the stories, but at the same time, you were getting exposed to all of this new, technology and innovation and the, leaders, like you said, in that space. And were you traveling around the country, the world, or where was the, this journalism happening?
Well, that specifically was the transition. Once you realize that there's a microcosm, there's a big business out there, and a lot of people were making a lot of money. So you could kind of make that transition and utilize some of those journalistic skills and become a salesperson in that really cutting edge type of an environment. I arguably made that transition very quickly, realizing that there were a lot of
opportunities.
Opportunities there. Having been married early and started my family early, it was a great opportunity to make a very nice living on that cutting edge, if you will.
So. Okay. So were you in medical sales to start with?
Yeah. Got right into it straight away. And frankly, one of the interesting dynamics, how to put this succinctly, when you can understand what the clinicians are talking about and you can understand the challenges, but also understand the peer-reviewed literature and how that might support a conversation, it really does separate you from a lot of your peers, if you will. And so having the ability to, for lack of a better term, talk clinical trash with clinicians, in the operating room or in the cardiac cath lab because you've done your homework was an opportunity to set yourself apart, but also you had mentioned earlier about building commercial organizations. When you know someone that can do that, that's excited about being on that cutting edge and can handle the pressure of running a case clinically, because you're in there with these new technologies. You're literally teaching these physicians as they're doing these procedures.
Right.
So as you're building those teams, they have to have not only the megs around, but the nerve to be able to stand in there and coach these clinicians through really novel technology, novel procedures. And so that was a big learning early on, that you really can, if you're watching what's going on with commercial part of the business, you can see those that are going to succeed and those that aren't, based on their ability to command a room, if you will.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So it's not only understanding the language and, speaking their language, but it's also doing the homework before. And I guess that's probably stem from journalism as well. Doing your research on a story, you're going in there equipped with background knowledge that then you can use to further the conversation, show that that you really understand the complex nature. You're not just the surface level understanding, but you have a deep understanding that can also serve to educate them.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Very good.
awesome. Now, you've helped build multiple businesses from the ground up. Looking back, what early experiences most prepared you for scaling complex organizations?
Well, I was blessed early on working with some large corporations that were starting entirely new businesses. So they had a history and a background of teaching and coaching leadership excellence. They had, and I don't want to say written the book, but they had a real grounding of what they did to teach leadership skills and move people through a process. Companies like J&J, CR Bard, ACS Guidant, where if you availed yourself of the resources, if you humbled yourself and availed yourself of the resources, there were a lot of extremely beneficial classes and tools, but also there are a lot of generous people there that were very willing, and they had been tremendously successful in early stage businesses that were more than willing to opine and share their thoughts and coaching. And so I think that was a big thing, that if people are offering you free education, embrace it and take what you can and utilize it. So
Oh, yeah, no, that's really good advice. And that's great that you are surrounded with those people who are willing to share. And yeah, that you were also receptive to taking their advice and recommendations and to learn from them. I can definitely relate. I started my business much the same way. I was working in marketing in an agency and just became a little sponge. And I had others there who were sharing, and that just fueled my curiosity even. And yeah, that's awesome. Now, was there a moment in your career when you realized that you were meant to lead at the intersection of innovation and commercialization?
another great question. Thank you for asking that. I think that as you look back, each of those new companies and the challenges that come with the new technology and really educating clinicians on what this technology can do for their patients, you find that not only are you dealing with, if you're familiar with that, they call it the marketing adoption model. You've got that 1 or 2% or the first movers and the early adopters and so on. If you, as a salesperson, as a business marketing commercialization leader, if you're always dealing with this top 1 or 2% really in the world, you appreciate what they bring, the wisdom they bring, the things they see that maybe others don't, but also you get the visibility to commercial people as you're out in the field. We used to call it management by wandering around. You meet these people and you realize that they've got it. You can talk to them. You know what the questions to ask them and so on. You see them at 4 o'clock in the morning, to get their day started. You see them at the end of the day, so you understand what performance looks like. It's kind of like watching Michael Jordan play basketball. You can see the difference between he and all the other players on the court.
Mm,
So in that space, when you're out and about and you're in the field, we used to call it the tip of the spear. Not only are you dealing with the clinicians that are really the tip of the spear, but also you're working with a group of people and drawing them to yourself because you're like-minded and performance-based and so on. So it becomes very obvious to those that know what they're looking at to identify the performers and build a team around that, coach them. Again, they're hungry. They want to
right.
learn and they want to perform. We used to joke around at ACS Guidant, they would have these President Club awards every year. And it was quite uncanny for a really large organization how many of the same people went every year. That wasn't just by happenstance. They went because they knew how to move the needle. They knew what it took to grow the business. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah, that makes sense.
it was early on, very early on. So
Yeah. Now, for listeners unfamiliar with Vestec, what problem are you solving, and why is it so critical in today's healthcare landscape?
Yeah. Vestec, the founders came to me, Dr. Johnny Doga and Dr. Terry Richard, a general surgeon back when they were the top of the pyramid, and Terry Richard is a CT surgeon from Paris. And they brought this technology to me. And I really didn't appreciate what they were saying. According to BMO, the investment banker, the aortic repair space right now is somewhere around a $7 billion market.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's big, and it's been successful. The founders said that it needs to be more successful. It needs to be more durable because these aortic grafts are being implanted in patients that have aneurysms, aortic aneurysms. If they're not addressed and they rupture, you've got a very, very high probability of passing away. So when they identify these aortic aneurysms, they put these endovascular grafts in through two small holes in the arteries in the legs, the femoral arteries, and they put the graft inside the aorta to exclude blood flow and depressurize the sac. And it sounds like a great idea. The founders made a comment to me that physics is a cruel mistress, and that when you've got diseased aortic tissue and you put a graft in there that's only being held in place by radial force, when you put radial force, outward force on already diseased tissue, the probability of that tissue dilating, the graft leaking and falling down goes up. And so the clinicians, Dr. Doga and Dr. Richard, developed this device that essentially sutures the graft in place, much like an open surgical repair, so that you get the durability of a surgical repair, but you've delivered these sutures through the very same sheath that's already in place, over the very same guide wire that's already in place when the physicians are implanting these endovascular grafts. And many physicians will say, we don't need to throw out the entire endovascular graft business. We just need to make it more durable, because the data would suggest around the world, 1.1, 1.4 billion baby boomers have a probability of, if it's women, it's about 2%. If it's men, it's up to about 8% of having an aortic aneurysm.
Wow, yeah,
And
that's
so
big. That's huge.
exactly,
Yeah.
it's a big population. Combine that with, depending on the complexity of their aneurysm, somewhere between 20 and 30 and 40% will be back for a second repair procedure within 2, 3, 5 years. And so the numbers they're staggering relative to the burden on the healthcare system by way of costs, but also, do we have enough physicians to be able to do not only the initial implant, but the repair procedures, along with the fact that, frankly, it's somebody's brother or sister, somebody's mom or dad, that coming back for a more complex repair procedure 2, 3, 5 years later, none of us are ever healthier 2, 3, 5 years later, 10 years later.
True.
And so our message from these clinicians, again, listen to them. They'll tell you what the problem is, find a need and fill it. They told us the peer-reviewed literature will document that there's a 20, 25, 30% probability you're going to have a leak or a migration with that graft. And so let's put them in. Let's suture them in place. We have a catheter that's preloaded with nitinol sutures, and it's very fast, very safe, and simple. And we've already got 14 human cases completed that are out 2 years now, and all of these patients are doing remarkably well. The aneurysm sacs are shrinking, the grafts aren't moving, and the patients are doing quite well. So the clinicians were right. If we can create that more durable endovascular procedure with a very easy to use, inexpensive device, why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you do it?
That makes sense. So the differentiator with the Vestec's technology is the suture, is what I'm hearing? Okay.
Yeah, our sutures will work with, there are a handful of major graft companies out there. W.L. Gore has a PTFE, expanded PTFE graft. Cook, Medtronic, Terumo all have Dacron grafts. We can sew all them in place. So the physician can pick which graft they want to insert into the patient. And then we go in right after that and we use our catheter to suture that graft in place, whether it's right below the renal arteries or above the renal arteries. We're agnostic in that regard also, that
Oh, okay.
we can suture the graft in place and help to make it more durable and really keep these patients from coming back.
Right. Yeah. And I'm hearing that's the fundamental difference is that your sutures, regardless of which type of graft you're using, are much more durable and preventative. And so patients aren't having to come back and re-expose themselves to surgery and all of the complexities that come along with that.
You
Yeah.
are correct. One of the challenges also is that in the world today, if 80% of these aneurysms are repaired endovascularly, you've got maybe 10, 12, 15 years of vascular fellows that have been trained, and arguably 80% of their aneurysm procedure repairs have been endovascular. And so when these patients come back and they can't be repaired endovascularly, and they have to have an open surgical repair, there's a little bit of a mismatch in the skill sets. Clinicians are really good at repairing things endovascularly, but when they've got to go back in now, they haven't really done that many open surgical procedures in their training.
Right. Yeah.
So it's an interesting time in our medical skills delivery where you've got these key opinion leaders that are experienced, that we really have to rely on them to do these complex procedures, the repair procedures. So,
And why hasn't this problem been fully resolved before?
well, to Medtronic's credit, we have one competitor out there, and Medtronic bought them years ago because they did recognize it. And then clinicians have said that was a great first generation tool. We need to evolve the technology. We need to evolve the ability to deliver these sutures easily and safely, et cetera. I think part of it also is that those key opinion leaders, they're at Mount Sinai, they're at Cleveland Clinic and Mayo. The implants that were done at the community hospital, when they have a problem, they're not going back to the community hospital. They're going to the big centers. So if you talk to the big center physicians they're on our advisory board, Sean Lydon from Cleveland Clinic and Dan Clare from Vanderbilt, they're on our advisory boards and they're saying that it's a big problem. And now it's a matter of companies like ours and clinicians like them having the courage to say, hey, we need new tools. These grafts are all FDA cleared. We don't want to throw the entire system out. It works. We just have to make it better. We have to make it more durable. And I think that when you've been at that cutting edge, that adoption curve and that mindset that we do have that problem that needs to be addressed, as you know, that curve oftentimes, whether it's FDA or CMS, Society for Vascular Surgery, a lot of that has to catch up. The white paper, the peer-reviewed literature has to catch up to support mainstream behavior.
Right. Do you have an idea of what the percentages of patients who have to go back for a second surgery?
Yeah, it depends who you talk to. There's a wonderful database here in the U.S. called the Vascular Quality Initiative, where they're tracking all of these cases. And if you're what they call a complex they call them off-label, if you have some complex anatomy in there, you've got about a 25 or 30% chance of coming back within 2 or 3 years.
Oh, that's significant.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And human nature being human nature, we put off going to see the physicians. And the longer we put off seeing physicians, the more complex these anatomies get. The number of complex procedures is going up, and the need for a device like ours is going up, especially with the baby boomers. So
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. The great news about that is screening is more readily available. It's lower cost, and there are more hospitals really around the world that are doing this procedure. So arguably, it is a perfect storm relative to have a device that's inexpensive to use, can keep people from coming back. But also, when they do come back, it's a tool to repair the grafts that are leaking and migrating endovascularly versus in an open surgical repair.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. So it's making the repair safer.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right. Now you're navigating what many founders call the valley of death between innovation and FDA clearance. What has that journey taught you about resilience and leadership?
Another wonderful question. I was out at the Viva meeting a number of years ago, and John Simpson, who's an icon in the interventional cardiology space, Peter Fitzgerald, another cardiologist, and they were talking 15 years ago about the valley of death, about getting, your early work done, and then needing to get this aspect of the company funded to get the FDA clearance done, so you can get onto commercialization. And I guess what I've learned about this in life, if life is that sinusoidal wave, that it is what happens, it doesn't go away. You just have to learn and listen to these people and take the coaching, manage your cash, keep the investor funnel full, and do what you can to survive that valley of death, because it is part of that sinusoidal wave of life, and trying to get through it. Do I have any magic answers other than manage your cash, keep your attitude strong, stay humble, because it will keep you humble when you're out of business or you're out of money, and you've got to have some of those hard conversations with people that you've worked with for years. It does keep you humble, but
Yeah.
fighting through it and continuing to ask investors, what can we do better, differently, smarter, stronger? What do we need to change to make the story more, make the technology more, to get that interest level higher, to get the investment?
Right. I
Does
know
that
it can
make
be
sense?
yeah, it does. And it can be a long process too. I know. So keeping spirits high, keeping that mindset in shape, weather the storm. Now,
Yeah,
yeah.
we were very fortunate. We raised over $13 million between COVID and what I'll call the post-COVID blues, if you will, this venture storm of venture capitalists moving away from that middle market to later in the market. Arguably, we raised 13 million during maybe the toughest time to do it. And now we were fortunate. The NIH and SBIR just granted us almost 2 million, 1.98 million in non-dilutive funding, because they saw the project that we were doing and felt that it was really, really valuable to patients and clinicians around the country. So we're blessed in that regard.
Yeah.
We filed it under the Biden administration. We got awarded under the Trump administration. We got awarded during the doging, when they were cutting the budget way back, obviously, and cutting out all superficial funding. So we felt very fortunate going through that scrutiny. And then when the government was shut down, we're able to get our funds each time we requested funds. We're living under the lucky star, if you will.
Yeah, that's super fortunate. Now, yeah, that was going to be my question, though, about the venture capital. How has the current venture capital environment reshaped how MedTech companies think about funding and growth?
Yeah, I think one person's opinion, it requires you to be much more polished and prepared walking into these investor meetings than you might have thought you needed to be in the past. Understanding the market opportunity, the commercialization opportunity, the reimbursement from CMS. So there are so many aspects to the story that you have to be fluent in and have to be prepared to address those questions, because as venture capitalists will say, the deal flow has never been higher. It's kind of like that. They talk about the Mississippi River. It just keeps flowing, and the deal flow, the new deals, the old deals, coming back, has never been higher. And it requires a level of professionalism and scrutiny that maybe has never gotten to this level before. Thank God for the internet. Thank God for our ability to pull data together and access data points that we might not have been able to in the past. So be prepared, because there's a lot of really bright people out there.
Yeah, yeah. And more competition is what I'm hearing, as
Yes.
well. Yeah. Now, with strategic players watching the space, how do you balance long-term mission with short-term survival?
Yeah. Wonderful. The strategics know who we are. I've been in the space for a long time, and have been fortunate that that maintaining those relationships with the business development people and the chief medical officers, et cetera, been keeping those communication lines open. It's amazing. I being the journalist, we're sending out kind of quarterly and semi-annual and annual updates to these venture capitalists, but also the strategics. And I always question them: is it too much? Are you interested? And to a person, very few of them say, no, take us off your update list. They really appreciate it because oftentimes their time to invest may change. They've got corporate direction and corporate initiatives that change with new administrations, with new leadership, et cetera, and with new visibility to the markets that are evolving. So they appreciate the updates, and they appreciate understanding how we're fighting the fight.
Right.
There have been some venture capitalists that have complimented us being a Philly person and having that gritty nature, that tenacity. They appreciate, reading about it, because a lot of folks haven't been able to weather the storm, if you will.
So providing them some value, and then they'll stay engaged. They're staying
Yeah.
engaged that way. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. And staying in their front of mind as well. So it's continuing to build that brand presence, I guess, if you would,
Correct.
with them.
Correct.
Now, Joe, you've spoken about the importance of humility in leadership. Why is that trait so essential, especially for CEOs?
Well, personally, we've all walked into a room and shied away from certain people. And what I've learned in life is that those folks that ask a lot of questions can learn a lot, and can arguably draw people to them that want to share. I've been blessed early in my career with some mentors that were humble folks also, and were very, very willing to share. So they were great examples. But when you surround yourself with really bright people, and that keeping your mouth shut and your ears open can really bring an awful lot of value in the boardroom, if you've got the right board members with a lot of these CEO groups and investor conferences, it is amazing how many folks are willing to share in a very genuine way. And that exposure kind of reinforces the fact that you don't know everything. And you never will. And the more you ask questions, and the more you go back, maybe it's going back to those journalistic roots where you're asking questions and listening about how people have done things. It is amazing what you learn. Additionally, when you're building your team and you've got experts on your team, operations and technical and engineering, they're the experts in the room, project management and so on. Listen to them, stay humble and listen to them, and take their coaching. You're still gonna be stuck with the decision. The ultimate decision.
Right. But getting educated by those who know more in those specific areas, and listening to their input, and also stay curious is what I'm really hearing. It's just maintain that curiosity, never assume that you know everything, and be open to the feedback from others before making those decisions. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, for entrepreneurs entering MedTech today, what mistakes do you see repeated most often?
That's another wonderful question. I think everybody's baby is beautiful, right? It's the best idea that God ever created. The Stanford, I'm going to butcher the name now. Stanford, I think it's Musellum Bio Design Group, talks about identifying a need, being in the operating room with physicians, identifying a need, and then validating how big the need is, how big the problem is, how big the market is, and how hard is it going to be to commercialize it, et cetera. And what I oftentimes will see is that there are CEOs that many of them will say, well, we won't need to commercialize because we're going to get taken out. A strategic will take us out, as soon as we get FDA clearance, or as soon as we do first in humans, and so on. And so that whole journey gets cut short, and that will alienate an awful lot of VCs, that you're that naive that the journey is going to be shortened because of the baby being beautiful. And frankly, have you validated all of those early steps? And so what I've learned is just, smile and wish them well. And they're going to find out that the VCs, they want to know what your commercialization plan is. They want to know what happens when you don't get purchased. Do you have the team and the insight to be able to go ahead and build this and get it to market. So those are some of the bigger things that I see.
So don't be presumptuous, basically. And
Yeah, everybody's
yeah.
baby is beautiful, but hope for the best, but plan for the worst.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, you're going to have to commercialize one way or the other,
Right.
and plan for it.
And believing in your product enough to think that far ahead, to be
Mhm.
that strategic, to,
Yeah,
I guess it's showing them that no matter what, you are going to move forward.
right,
Yeah.
right. And some call it contingency planning. The what if? What if we
Mhm.
don't get bought as soon as we've done our first in humans? Well, then here's the plan. And what if we don't get bought after FDA? Here's the plan. Move forward in that regard. That if you don't have those contingencies, oh well, that speaks volumes to the venture capitalists that would arguably invest in you or invest in the technology. So
Yeah.
most of the VCs will say, it's almost cliche, that they're not really investing in a technology; they're investing in a leadership team. And so the fact that we're in Death Valley may speak to the leadership team, uh, but we're still here and we're fighting the fight. So.
Yeah, exactly. Now, finally, Joe, if you could give one piece of advice to innovators building in high risk, high impact industries, what would it be?
Do your homework relative to the market opportunity and the market problem. Again, it goes back to somebody has a great idea. They think it's a great idea, and go talk to those clinicians, that 1 or 2% that really are at the front edge, the leading edge. Go to the large institutions and understand what their problems are, so that you understand whether your technology answers and solves a problem. What are you trying to fix, accomplish, avoid? And frankly, if the clinicians tell you that it doesn't solve any problem, go find a problem to fix. But
Hmm.
there are lots of ideas out there that are, you know, fourth, fifth, eighth, version of an existing technology. Is that a market you want to get into, or is there
Sure.
something novel? As you said about us, it's a fairly novel, fairly large market, and a fairly novel, volatile space. Um, pick the right space to get into.
Right.
Does that answer
Yeah.
your question?
Yeah, definitely. So make sure that the problem you're solving is actually a true problem
Hmm.
and that there's the demand there, that it's not already saturated with other people who are trying to work on that same problem, and figure that out by going to the leaders in the
Hmm.
institutions and the industries. Now, how do you get access to those people?
Um, I, everybody's not your friend until they're your friend.
Yeah.
Between the internet and sales meetings, or investor conferences and professional meetings, having the courage or the humility to introduce yourself and say hello and ask some questions. It is amazing how approachable these folks really are. They are larger than life individuals. Sean Lydon is our chief medical officer, and he's the chairman of the Department of Vascular Surgery at Cleveland Clinic. Dan Clare is the chairman of, I think, of all surgery down at Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
But when you get to meet these people, they are very down to earth, fathers, husbands, they're regular people like the rest of us. They just have really big jobs.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and so if you get the chance to reach out and say, hey, can I ask you a question or two? You'd be surprised how approachable they really are. So,
Yeah. Well, that's good advice.
yeah.
Well, Joe, thank you for sharing your journey, your leadership philosophy, and the meaningful work you're doing at Vestec. For listeners who want to learn more about Vestec, where should they go?
Well, our website is really complex. It's www.vestec.com. If you also go on YouTube and YouTube Vestec, um, we've been in the fight for quite a while. So there's lots of video out there, and physicians making presentations and so on. So lots of information there about Vestec. We are raising $16 million for this round. We'll do probably tranche it into a $6 million first part of the tranche, and then $10 million second part. And so we are raising funds. So if there are any VCs or high net worth individuals that are interested in fighting the fight with us, it's greatly appreciated. It's a
Yeah,
hell of an opportunity.
great opportunity. And I look forward to following your journey. Very exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and tune in to the next conversation. Until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and keep igniting industry.